Greetings, namaste, vanakkam. It is a joy to be with you all today to celebrate International Yoga Day. My name is Lori Rubestein Fazzio, and I am a clinical professor of yoga and health at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And I'm also the clinical director of the Yoga Therapy RX program at Loyola Marymount University with Larry Payne. I'm a practicing physical therapist and yoga therapist at Mosaic Physical Therapy in Los Angeles. And I'm honored to be on the advisory board for the Center for Yoga Therapy Education and Research. So before I start, I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Sri Balaji Vidyapeeth University for having the foresight and the wisdom to recognize the value of yoga therapy within a healthcare setting, particularly a hospital. And we have had the benefit of coming to visit on 2 occasions. We've taken 2 groups of students, and we all have benefited tremendously in seeing the amazing work that Dr. Ananda Bhavanani, Dr. Meena Ramanathan, and their entire team of CYTER are doing at the hospital. And it's inspired us to take that wisdom and that work back here in the United States. So I thank you for that. And I'd like to send special thanks to Dr. Ananda. Many years ago, as a very curious student that I am, I reached out to my teacher, Larry Payne, with question after question. And about 15 years ago, he said to me, you know, I don't have the answer to this question, but I know who does. And that's when he connected me with Dr. Ananda. And through email, Dr. Ananda was so generous in sharing his wisdom with me, question after question. And I'm extremely grateful for all that he shared. And I've been observing since this COVID time, witnessing how generously he shares all his wisdom with the entire world. The entire world is benefiting from this generosity, and it's inspired me, inspired so many others. So thank you, Dr. Ananda and Dr. Meena, for being the light that guides the way for all of us. So today I've been asked to speak about cultivating resilience during COVID. The lens that I'm going to speak to today is going to start off with speaking about COVID as the microcosm and the macrocosm, speak a little bit about what resiliency is, and then I'm going to focus on the psychophysiological effects of social distancing, of isolation and stress, and what these have presented us with, these challenges that we have an opportunity to harness for as a challenge to create a better life. And then share some of the psychoneurophysiological effects of yoga practices that can help us to cultivate resilience. So let's start off with COVID as a microcosm. So COVID is a virus, as we all know, and we know that it affects our respiratory system and our cardiovascular system. So I'm going to speak about this from a lens of the pranavayus, the 5 pranas, which is basically how the life force enters and spreads through our body. So COVID inhibits the ability of us to take in prana. The lungs themselves become inflamed and filled so that in severe cases, people are unable to breathe. It also affects the Vyana Vayu, which is the ability of the prana to spread through our whole system, to circulate through our system. Our circulatory system can be affected in severe cases from COVID. People have had strokes, blood clots, and inflammatory conditions. And our bodies, in response to this, our bodies respond with fever and inflammation to fight the virus. And this is a heat. It responds with heat. So we could look at it as an excess of heat. So from a macrocosm view, if we step back from COVID for a moment and look at what's been happening with our environment as humans, we have crowded the earth. We have built and built and built. We have destroyed forests and built cities. And in doing so, we have polluted the air so that not only is the earth having a hard time breathing, but it's affecting our ability to breathe and causing increased incidences of respiratory disease. We've polluted and clogged the circulation of the world, the waterways, with plastics and other pollution. And in building these cities, humans have become in closer contact with wild animals because there's less space on the earth for the wild animals to roam. And that's thought to be why we've experienced these viruses such as Ebola and COVID-19. And the earth has responded with its own form of heat, global warming. And I think we all know the effects of that. So COVID-19 offers us an opportunity for it to be a catalyst to build both our own resiliency and resiliency support the earth and its resiliency. This is the first time that the entire planet, all humans, have been stopped in our tracks. COVID has brought that upon us. And as a result, we're already seeing the resiliency of the planet because the air and the water are cleaner. So that shows us both the effects that our daily life has upon the planet, and it demonstrates to us the resiliency of the planet. There's more animals that are roaming, and the air and the water are cleaner. So now it gives us an opportunity to reflect, this svadhyaya of reflecting, really studying ourselves and asking ourselves, how can we move forward in partnership for both individual health and global health? So I'm going to focus today on cultivating personal resilience with a sankalpa, like a heartfelt intention on recognizing that as we are this microcosm of the macrocosm, that one of the intentions and the aspects of cultivating resiliency in ourselves is that it enables us to be in service, to recognize a higher purpose, and to be in service to others and in service to the planet. So that's the view that I'll be focusing on today. So to manage COVID, we have all been practicing social or physical distancing. And I know some like to call this a lockdown. It's a harsh term. But so I'm going to speak about the psychophysiological effects of this social physical distancing or lockdown. And from the lens of it being immobilization, a form of immobilization with fear. So there are many fears that we are facing today. There's many unknowns that we don't feel control of. We have fears of our own health, fears of losing our loved ones, economic fears, financial fears, fears of our jobs, fears of when we'll be able to see one another, and the list goes on and on. So we can ask ourselves, how can yoga support us during this time, this lockdown? And how can yoga support us in coming out of this lockdown so that we actually have improved mental, physical, interpersonal, societal, and environmental health? That's what resiliency is. So what is resiliency? It's a positive adaptation to adversity. So can we meet challenges with adaptive stress responses rather than survival-based reactionary? It's one of the things yoga teaches us, is how to not be reactionary, but how to be responsive. Now, this is while this includes physiological resilience, it's a little different from that physiological resilience that we measure as respiratory sinus arrhythmia or heart rate variability. So I won't be talking about that today, but that is included within this and is a very important part for our own health and well-being. Some signs of resilience are optimism, bonding with others, and actively coping and reevaluating our priorities. So perhaps we can look at, do we need to be doing much of the travel that we do, which we know that now there's been less airlines and vehicle travel, that's part of why the planet is healthier. It involves self-care, maintaining our physical health, and as I said before, an increased sense of purpose and meaning. Are we following our Dharma? And it enables us to be increased service to others and to the planet. Now, COVID-19 is a threat to everybody's health. That's how we can see it. And as a threat, it triggers our survival mechanism. All beings are wired for survival. It's part of nature. So how does this work for us as humans? Stephen Porges has termed something called neuroception, and that's basically our subconscious, so without our awareness, our nervous system's evaluation of our environment at all times, and this happens through our senses, to evaluate the risk. And it determines, is there a threat or are we safe? If threat is detected, it will stimulate our physiology into a survival state. This is the most primitive of the reactions of the nervous system. We're in survival state, so we're not accessing our higher cognition. We're not using our prefrontal cortex to make sense of things. We just react. Now, you may have noticed this since this lockdown, that maybe in conversation with those who are in your environment, you may have lashed out or said something you didn't mean to. That's an example of being reactionary. And then you can step back and think, oh, I'm sorry, I was upset. Now, if it detects safety, it will engage our most evolved, most responsive mechanisms. And that is termed the social engagement, or it's part of our vagus nerve called our ventral vagal complex that I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, I said before that the neuroception is without our awareness. So this can even be when we are sleeping. So if you are sensitive to sounds, you might wake up to a sound, whereas somebody else might sleep through that sound. How do we experience this in our conscious state is through what we call interoception. So interoception gives us those signals of what our nervous system is interpreting in our environment. So we might feel butterflies in our stomach, which could be an indication of fear or excitement, depending on our perspective. We could feel knots in our stomach if we're scared. People often describe feeling a heaviness in their chest. So these are some examples. And our past experiences, our memory or our smriti, which is one of our mental modifications that can be an affliction for us, that modulates how vigilant our system is. So when I was talking about the sound, if somebody has had trauma, their system might be more vigilant to noticing sounds in the environment and thus might be a more light sleeper, might wake up for all kinds of sounds, whereas somebody else might be able to sleep through loud noises. So the autonomic nervous system, I'm talking about this aspect of our nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. It's classically been talked about as a binary, as sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight, which is part engaged in our stress response, and our parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest. But it's more complicated than that. And Stephen Porges gives us the polyvagal theory, which talks about really three aspects. It talks about the parasympathetic nervous system, this vagal nerve, as well as so the vagal nerve has got two aspects. It's got this more the social engaged. It's called the ventral vagal complex, and that aspect is responsible primarily for functions above our diaphragm, so our heart, our lungs, and our face and our throat, that I will speak to in a moment. And then we have the dorsal vagal, which is responsible for the freeze response, which is our least evolved. So that's like the play dead, although that's an extreme. We can also be in a freeze response and function in daily life. And then we have the sympathetic nervous system. So when we feel safe, all three elements can work together that enable us to be active and safe, enable us to heal, to grow, generate creativity, be open to new ideas, to listen to each other, to have empathy, to communicate, to listen. And this is what we're aiming for with resilience. So when we have fear, on the other hand, when we have fear, we will be engaged in a survival response. So first I'm going to talk about that, and then I'll come back to the social engagement. So the fight or flight, what happens with that is when we have fear and we are not able to navigate through it with our social engagement, this comes from something called the Jackson's theory of dissolution, which is we'll first try to navigate threat by talking it out or by our body language. And if that doesn't work, that system will disengage and we'll go into this fight or flight. So when the fight or flight dominates, it's actually important. It's not a bad thing. It's for survival. We'll have cortisol, adrenaline, which is epinephrine, and norepinephrine will release into our system to help us to fight or to flee. Our heart rate will go up, our blood pressure will go up. Our skeletal muscles, particularly our back and neck muscles, which are our orienting muscles to identify where is the threat or how do I get out of here, those will tense. We'll have blood flow to those regions. We'll have decreased blood flow to our organs. We don't need to have to stop and urinate if we're running from the tiger. And we'll become more aggressive. Now, again, this is normal. This is a normal response, and it's really important for our survival. The problem is, in today's world, we often live in a state of chronic stress. And during this COVID period, many of us have been in this state of chronic stress. And when that happens, when it doesn't regulate back down, it results in poor health. It compromises our immune system and our ability to heal. It causes hypertension, which is elevated blood pressure. It can cause diabetes, can affect our mood, causing depression or anxiety, can cause insomnia, and the list goes on and on. Now, all animals except humans have a natural response to when this is engaged. So when an animal gets under threat, you might see this in your dog or cat, the head and neck go up, the tail goes up, the ears go up. So that's that looking for the threat. And then after the threat is gone, they will run around or shake and then take a nap. And this modulates the nervous system back to homeostasis, or what we would call a Sot Fix state in yoga. Humans, we don't do this. We use our higher cognition in our mind to tell ourselves, it's okay, it's stress, I can deal with it. The problem is that those chemicals are stored as energy in our system, our physiology, the cortisol and the adrenaline. And we do need to discharge this energy and rebalance the nervous system. That's one of the ways that we can use yogasana, is that we can move our body and discharge this rajas, this energy. We have all of our, everything in this manifest world has either this, it's functioning through rajas, which is the quality of movement or action. And then we have the quality of tamas, which is this inertia. And then we have sattvic is the balance. These are all functioning all the time. If we get too much of one, we're out of balance. So we want to regulate back to sattva or homeostasis. So what we try to do in yoga is to regulate this and strengthen our ability to maintain engagement of this social engagement or ventral vagal complex so that we can be more resilient to stress. So then if we, separate from the fight or flight, we also have the freeze response that I mentioned, which is when the dorsal vagal complex is predominating. The social engagement disengages, maybe the fight or flight didn't work, or for whatever reason, our system engages in a freeze response. This is the opposite. This is when we actually shut down. It's the play dead. And at a less extreme case, we're going to have a lowering of our respiratory rate, our heart rate, our blood pressure. Our immune response is still lowered. We might have a flat affect, which is like a lack of expression, because those expressive qualities are from the social engagement system. So we might have difficulty expressing. We might feel hopeless or numb, disconnected. Might look spaced out. And there's difficulty listening, and I'll speak about that in a while. We actually have difficulty listening because we're attuned to threat. So we actually can't hear the human voice very well. We can have increased pain, and the blood flow is not going to our brain and our limbs as much, and that can result in us feeling confused or having memory impairment and even fainting or collapsing. It's our most primitive response. Now, chronic immobility, so it's a chronic state of that, is associated with having numbing out, feeling helpless, depressed, fear, and even terror or rage. When we're in this state, it disengages the reasoning functions of our brain, that prefrontal cortex. And it deprioritizes our ability to sense our emotions and our sensations, and it goes into this autopilot. We shut down, and again, that psychophysiological trauma can get stuck in our system. And when we come out of that, we have to move back through the sympathetic system, the engaged. And what yoga can help us to do is to come back through that. So come out of this immobilization period that we've all been in through this social distancing and this lockdown, is to come out of it, not with rage, which can happen, but to come out of it with a healthy response. So how do we activate the socially engaged ventral vagal complex? And how do we down-regulate this defense mode? We cultivate safety. We cultivate that through present moment awareness, non-judgmental awareness, and this cultivates interoception. Now I'll talk about that a little more, and first I'm going to talk and explain a little more about the ventral vagal complex, this social engagement. As I said, it's supradiaphragmatic. It's the heart, the lungs, the face, and the throat. This works with many of the cranial nerves. The vagal nerve is cranial nerve 10. It's the longest cranial nerve, and it innervates all of the organs in our system, including the heart and the lungs. It's mostly 80% of it is afferent, which means 80% of it's taking information from the organs to the brain and the higher nervous system. It works with many of the other cranial nerves that control the muscles of our face and our jaw and the muscles of our throat that regulate our speech. It's involved in both voice communication and listening. We have little muscles in our middle ear, and when we're safe, these muscles tense, and that enables the human voice to reach the eardrum and to be processed in the brain. These intonations are called prosodic vocalizations. They're intonations that convey pleasant emotion. And this is as opposed to predator tones. So when we're able to be in this state, we're happy, we're open, we're curious, we're peaceful, our immune response is healthy, our organ function is optimal, we sleep well, we digest well. Again, we're able to listen, we're able to process, we can understand each other, we can feel calm, and we can have empathy. All these great qualities. When this is disengaged, so when we don't feel safe, we're wired for survival, so those muscles are not contracted, and it's harder for us to be able to listen to the tones of the human voice, because our nervous system, that Neuro Section, is scanning for the predator, which are the lower tones. So when you watch a movie and they go doo 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 doo, like Jaws, that's that sound that they play. We know something scary is about to happen. Those tones are being picked up by our nervous system to make us feel scared, so that we can have the emotion that the movie is trying to convey. COVID, with social distancing, has impaired our ability to really access the social engagement. The social distancing has reduced our social engagement system. So the nervous system is constantly taking cues from the environment, and that includes people's faces and body language and their intonations. When we speak to babies and pets, we speak with these prosodic vocalizations like, "Oh my goodness, you're so cute. You're so cute. I love you so much." And we say all these sweet things because they don't understand our words. So we convey emotion through our voice, as opposed to, "No, you are very bad, bad, bad," and this negative, dark tones are picked up by the nervous system, and you can see the animal or the baby react to the tone, the intonation. With the facial expressions, if you've been with somebody and you can sense that they're upset even before they've spoken, there's body language and facial expressions. You might say to them, "Hey, are you okay?" And the response is, "Yeah, I'm fine." And you know they're not fine, because our nervous system is wired to pick this up. It's a threat to us, because if they're not fine, we are assessing, are we fine? Are we okay? If the nervous system can't read this, it's not sure, it will become more hypervigilant because it's unsure if it's safe. So Zoom calls that many of us have been on are an example of this. You've ever given a talk on a Zoom call and you see a bunch of faces? We typically see this. We see this lack of expression, and it can be disheartening for the speaker, because we don't know if the participants are enjoying what we're saying or not. And so it can make us more nervous. Those are some of the examples. And being on Zoom calls has had a plethora of other effects on our system, and I'll speak to that in just a moment. The big question now is, how do we facilitate a healthy balance of all three aspects of the autonomic nervous system through yoga and cultivate resilience? I'm going to talk about some of the practices of yoga, particularly speaking about the psychoneurophysiology that these practices can offer us to cultivate resilience. I'm going to start with asana or yogasana. These are the postures. One of the things that asana can do is help us to release that stored energy I talked about from when we're immobilized. So when we can't fight or flight, which has pretty much been the case, being in this lockdown, we haven't been able to be active, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's happening, and there's not a whole lot we can do. It's out of our control. So on the one hand, from the top down, from our mind, yoga helps us cultivate perspective, to be able to discern when we don't have control and to put it into perspective. And then also from this bottom up, or through the body, Through asana, we can help regulate what the physiology, how the physiology has responded. So if we've been in immobilization and this anxiety energy, this cortisol and adrenaline is stored in our system, we can release it through the more physical asanas. My favorite practice I learned from Dr. Ananda is this shaking, which is similar to the pets, like I said, and the cleansing of the nadis, the nervous system. So we can shake. You can all do it with me right now, actually. So just, we can all use this. We have so much stress. Is just shake it out. You could shake your head, shake your limbs, just kind of clean off your nervous system. Clean it all off and discharge some of that cortisol and adrenaline, which is those stress hormones. And then notice how your heart rate goes up. This is activating that sympathetic nervous system. And as I said, when we come out of immobilization state, we have to move through the sympathetic nervous system state. We want to do it in a healthy way. So that means we want to do it with a feeling of safety. So we could put a smile on our face. And just putting a smile on our face tells our nervous system we're happy. Believe it or not, there's studies that have shown that. So put a smile on your face as you shake. That tells your nervous system, I'm happy, and this sympathetic state that I'm activating on purpose is a safe one. So I'm getting that ventral vagal complex, that social engagement, because my facial muscles are engaged, just telling my nervous system everything's okay, and I'm active. So they're working in partnership. And let that calm and observe. Observe the energy in the nervous system. We're cultivating the sense of interoception. So perhaps if it's comfortable, the eyes open or the eyes closed, whichever makes you feel more safe in this moment. I'll have my eyes closed. I'm sensing the pulsations. I've also just activated the circulatory system. So I'm moving that Vyana Vayu, that prana, moving that prana through the system. And I'm sensing it with awareness. You may sense a tingling, a vibration, a heat. And then sense the weight of your body on the earth. Sensing the weight of the body on the earth, allowing yourself to be supported by the earth. Feeling the heaviness, this tamasic quality. So we stimulated with rajas, and we're noticing that it can exist with the balance of this heaviness, that we can be grounded. We're balancing safe mobilization with safe immobilization. So through asana, we can do active postures and then balance them with either sitting still or with shavasana, corpse pose, which is an immobilized state while we're trying to cultivate safety. We can also do it concurrently. So we can take a challenging posture such as Utkatasana, or chair pose, requires activation of the sympathetic nervous system, at the same time that we maintain a steady, comfortable breath. Research has showed that a 6-count inhale with a 6-count exhale is optimal for our physiological resilience, this heart rate variability. That's only if it's comfortable for you. If that feels like it's a strain, then do what's comfortable for you and work up to that. At the same time, we want to have positive emotions and thoughts. Coherence, which is another aspect of resilience, is stimulated when we think positive emotions. So when we're thinking positive emotions, those affect our physiology. So we want to cultivate these positive emotions. And how I like to put these three together. So I'll go into Utkatasana, into the chair pose, and I will move my arms. So I will inhale as I open the arms for 6 count and exhale as I close the arms. And to add in the third layer is I borrow a piece from the Buddhist metta meditation, the loving kindness is, may all beings know peace, may I know peace. And I'll set that to a 6 count pace so that I'm inhaling as I'm silently reciting to myself, may all beings know peace. And I'm exhaling while I slowly move to the 6 count, may I know peace. You can use whichever one of those positive mantras works for you. And that's another way that we can work with asana. Asana has also been shown to stimulate changes in our brain, neuroplasticity, positive changes when we practice with awareness of our system. We can cause changes in many areas of our brain and actually increase regions of the brain that are associated with empathy, positive mood, reasoning, so that we're not reactive, we're able to process and reason, and creativity. All things we need to be able to engage with society and to be able to come up with solutions for a healthier planet. Now, the postures that we put ourselves in also can affect our physiology. You may have heard of the power posture, which that research had lots of criticism. There's several other studies that have looked at the effect that our posture has on our physiology. And it's found that slumped postures are associated with negative thoughts and helpless emotions, whereas upright postures and back bends are associated with positive mood and positive thoughts, which is that safe mobilization again. So Zoom, many of us have been slouching over Zoom, and that can create a negative emotion. So take a moment and slouch. Let's try this with me. Slouch and try to smile. It almost doesn't feel authentic to smile here. And now take an upright posture, open the chest, open the arms, and try to frown. It's awkward. It almost feels like this posture makes you want to smile. So we can choose postures that can modulate the physiology as well. Another thing, you may notice that when you do asanas and you stretch out, that you feel calm after. Well, when our neck muscles are tense, that actually tells our brain that we're protecting and that we're bracing because there's a threat. And when our leg muscles are tense, this is for a period, our leg muscles tense, it tells our brain that we're bracing for a threat and we need to run. So it puts us in defense mode. So it's one of the reasons why when you release these muscles, you can feel more calm. Then we have pranayama. So pranayama, we have specific pranayamas that can have all kinds of health effects and physiological effects, and most of them help to create this autonomic resilience. In fact, it's what is most written about and studied in yoga for wellness, is how do we use pranayama to regulate our nervous system. The couple that I'll recommend for this state of coming out of this COVID, well, one is sometimes a pranayama, it's also a kriya, which is Kapalabhati, because it can also help to cleanse our lungs. It also helps us to be able to control our breath better when we practice Kapalabhati. It does have some contraindications. Diaphragmatic breathing and slowly extending the exhale, as Yoga Sutra 1.34, calm is retained by the slow controlled exhalation, is these can help to enhance our cardiovagal tone. They can stimulate the calming hormones in our system and help us to be more alert with better cognition. It's better for our health. So the 6-count inhale and the 6-count exhale has been studied the most, although there are some other forms of pranayama that are very, very beneficial. I want to focus a little bit on chanting, or bhajans, or kirtan, and singing. These are forms of singing, or nada yoga, this vocal yoga. These all engage those prosodic vocalizations, or they can, depending on this tone. So when we practice chanting, when we practice the bhajans and kirtan, both listening to these as well as the act of chanting, if we focus on feeling the vibrations and listening to the intonations, we are cultivating that social engagement system. We're using these muscles and we're cultivating the ability to hear these tones. It also enhances our interoception by focusing on feeling them, which enhances our vagal tone. So we want to, again, feel these vibrations and cultivate that ventral vagal complex. And this will help us to down-regulate that autonomic sympathetic response or the freeze response. So they're basically neural exercises of social engagement. So they're those small little muscles of the ears that we are training. Stephen Porges, who created this polyvagal theory, he did a project called the Listening Project. So with autistic children, and where they listen to these prosodic vocalizations, and that's where they studied this and found that it resulted in increased vagal tone and a calmer physiological state. So we can apply this to ourselves. The other thing that it does is that the act of chanting and then the act of singing involves a slow, long exhale. And as I already said, that increases vagal tone and slows the heart and helps us to be in a safe, calm state. So you can try for yourself and see how it is when you listen to these. Another practice that combines movement with the sounds is from the Gitananda lineage, the Brahma Mudra, wherein we move the head while we're chanting the bija sounds, the bija mantras. So this engages all the muscles of the ventral vagal complex, the social engagement, and can nurture this system. Another practice or category would be pratyahara, which is not suppressing our senses as many think it's controlling the senses. It's actually involves becoming more attuned to our senses so that we can be less reactive to them and more responsive or less engaged. And ultimately to recognize that the sensory world is ever changing. This is the essence of Prakriti. Samkhya philosophy teaches us that this manifest world, ourselves and everything on this planet is manifest, that the qualities of this Prakriti are that it's ever changing. Whereas there is a divine aspect of ourself, the Purusha. You may know it as the soul or the Atman. This is this divine, never-changing aspect. It's the observer. So through these practices of pratyahara and yoga nidra, we train ourselves to have non-judgmental observation of our senses, including the sense of emotions, the sense of our thoughts, and the sensation of our beliefs. And as we concentrate on these subtle senses, it can cause us, as Yoga Sutra tells us, causes a steadiness of our mind and helps us to recognize that all of this is ever-changing and helps us to disengage from that ever-changing world and to identify with the witness, to recognize that we are not this ever-changing world. This is our avidya, this is our ignorance. That's our ultimate goal. Part of the practice of yoga nidra that I mentioned is oftentimes practiced in shavasana. And as I said earlier, in with asana, we can either practice an active posture and then go into shavasana, and that trains us to go from an engaged state to a calm state. We can also practice being in shavasana, in this corpse pose, which is an immobilized state wherein we feel safe. So some people aren't able to feel safe in that posture. When we practice it enough, when we discharge this energy, after we've discharged it, we can go into shavasana and recognize that this state of safe immobilization that we're in is also helping to cultivate resilience. Other things that we can do is recognize that we have sangha. It's the social engagement. And I think many people think of social engagement as how many likes we got on our post, and that's a different type of social engagement. I'm talking about social engagement where we can actually train our neuroception, where we can engage our neuroception. So be in community with safe people where you feel safe, and start to retrain your system. So as we come out of this lockdown, where we've been in proximity to very few people, if you felt really stressed and you're not feeling a sense of safety, start off being in communities where you feel safe so that you can acclimate back. Another practice that we can do is Pratipaksha Bhavana. Most who know me know this is my favorite. So Yoga Sutras 1.33 and 1.34 potentially discusses that we can take negative thoughts and change them to positive thoughts. And goes further to say that negative thoughts and action, they both come from pain and they cause pain. And we know from neuropsychology that positive emotions are what facilitate coherence. And so when we cultivate these positive emotions, that enables us to be better at problem solving, to have better mental acuity, make better decisions, and we can be more active. So again, it's not just to have these things, but then what do we do with these things? And that's where we want to talk about the yamas and the niyamas, the ethics of yoga. We take what we've cultivated and we look at how are we on a personal level, an interpersonal level, societal level, and a global level, how are we relating? How are these relationships? How do we show up in the world? And how can we do this in a way so that we're resilient and the world is resilient, so that we can have a safer, healthier, both world amongst humans as well as the planet. And all of these practices that I've talked about, we can apply the concept of Kriya Yoga, which is that pain is a path to purification. So we look at COVID as the pain, can be our path to purification. And with all these practices, we do tapas, which helps us to build inner strength. This is these disciplines, and that it's this inner heat, and it's how we challenge this inner heat. So it's the practices that we have to keep doing. It's abhyasa. We have to keep practicing. And we have to vairagya. We have to let go of what we can't control. And practice with svadhyaya, with an internal reflection, looking at ourselves, looking at how we're relating, really reflecting on this. And ultimately, Ishvara Pranidhana, surrendering to the divine will. And when we do all of this, COVID can be the catalyst, can be that pain that purifies ourselves and ultimately can help to purify the planet. That was the Sankalpa. I thank you all for your listening and for your participation. And again, thanking Dr. Ananda and CYTER for inviting me to be here. It's an honor